Astamur, I think you might be muted. Yep.
Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. So for us here, it is morning in Germany. Dan, I have a question. Do I have to accept this? Okay, so I think, all right, okay. Thanks for introduction. I will be presenting to you today my research on, as Dana already mentioned, about minorities in Georgia and how do they identify themselves in terms of nationality, national identity. And these minorities will be people with Armenian names, first and last names. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay, good. First of all, I want to tell you a little bit about how did I come to the topic, my personal experience, and afterwards I want to say you about the exclusionist setting itself, which dominates Georgian society. And afterwards, I will come to the last part of my presentation, to the topic of the rejected Georgians who experienced those exclusionist practices, and to understand how do they, what practices of identity building are they choosing. Okay, my personal setting. I come from Georgia. I was not born in Georgia, but I grew up there. I was born in one of Russian towns where my mother was studying. Here you can see the map of Georgia with its neighbors. And you can see several circles as well. So each circle has its own meaning, or yeah, of course. But I will speak mostly of two of them. So the first one, the small yellow circle stands here for Batumi, my hometown where I grew up. And it is the place my father is from. Actually, my mother is also from this yellow circle, from this coastal town. She grew up there as well, but her ancestors come from the part which is called Abkhazia. Yeah. And which is now disputed territory. And my grandmother, she comes from Russia. She's Russian, she was born there. And so I have this, in myself, I have this mixed background, if I can say like that. And I have also mixed first and family name. Like my family name sounds really very Georgian, and whereas my first name is Abkhazian, yeah, the part which I've already showed to you. So so that you imagine, these are my first name is quite seldom in Georgia. Quite seldom in Georgia. You won't be able to meet many persons with that name, and that's why it affected or affects also my personal identity building. Yeah, because it's not sounding Georgian. And all the time when you are asked about, okay, where does your name come from, you are all the time reminded that, okay, somehow you are from here, but since you have all the time to define where does your name come from, maybe it's not like 100% for sure that you are from here, yeah, or you belong to here for 100%. Okay, this was the first part of my personal background. Now I will say a little bit more based on two examples. I participated in a census only one time in my life, in 2014, and a census taker, after asking me several just very basic, very normal questions, what's your name, when you were born and where, etc. On these questions, she waited for my answer. But then come a next question: what is your nationality? And I just ask you not to confuse nationality and ethnicity, or nationality and citizenship, which is not the same in Georgia. And when she asked me about my nationality, she didn't ask me, of course, about if I'm possessing a Georgian pass or not, but if I identify myself as Georgian. So I was speaking fluently Georgian. I have a Georgian family name, and she asked, you are Georgian, yes? So, and you are Orthodox Christian, yes? And she just, it was rather a rhetoric question, and she was not really waiting for my answer. So in this case, I was identified as a Georgian. And there was also another example from Batumi, from my hometown. I was in a hospital with my grandmother, with my Russian grandmother during the COVID pandemic. And isn't it too loud in the background?
It's a bit loud, but we can still hear you.
Okay, wait, please. Sorry. Yeah, and so we were sitting in a hall. She got her first vaccine, and we were waiting for the side effects. And we were sitting in front of each other, like 3 meters were between us. And on the left to me, there was sitting an elderly lady. She was also waiting for side effects. And we were speaking time to time with my grandmother in Russian. And I had a strange feeling that the elderly woman is following us with her head. And once when my grandmother pronounced my name in order to catch my attention, Astamur, then this elderly lady just rapidly said, are you Abkhazians? Like, and it was also a very similar rhetorically asked question. She was convinced she did not need the answer at this moment. At least I had this impression. She knew that we are like Abkhazians, and she just asked it to be sure that she's right. So in both cases, not me, but others decided about my identity based on my first name or my last name. Yeah, and it is, as I already told, the setting in which I grew up and I lived through, and this is the thing which moved me to research for the topic I'm researching. I think that I just wanted to say you my personal experience because it could illustrate at best what is the setting and how does it work. According to that, my research question, since in Georgia there are lots of people of minority background or people who are not directly associated as Georgians, even if they possess Georgian passport and are Georgian citizens. I asked myself, okay, I have a Georgian family name, and in the countries like Georgia, where like paternal family name stands actually for nationality very often. If your father is Georgian, then you are Georgian. If your father is Greek, you are Greek, etc., etc. Yeah, in such societies, what do people feel? What people with Armenian names feel if they grew up and socialized in Georgian setting, but they have Armenian first and last names? How do they identify themselves? It was my question. Yeah, and if I was interested if they identify themselves as Georgians, and how do they want to be seen by Georgians? And I had also my hypothesis. I argued that if some of the Georgian-speaking Armenians desire to be perceived as Georgians, the main obstacle for them in doing so is unwillingness of Georgians to accept them as a part of the Georgianness. This was my hypothesis. Yeah, maybe some of them want to be seen as Georgians, but they don't say that they are, because they don't feel comfortable about that, because it would mean that they would have to like insist or just okay, maybe a little bit later about that. It was my hypothesis. Yeah, so now I already mentioned something about the setting in Georgia, national setting, but I will come closer to the topic of Armenians. Just as information, in Georgia, people of whom we today speak as of Armenians have lived on the territory which is today called Georgia for many, many, many centuries. And for example, first mentioning of an Armenian woman, I'm very careful with this name. In the early medieval period, I'm not really keen on calling these people Armenian because, or whatever, Georgians, I don't know, because it's, I think, it's a very dangerous interpretation of reality and ascribing identities, national identities, which people didn't possess back then in the 5th century. But okay, I will still like call this person Armenian. After this remark, I may allow it to myself. So there was a woman, a princess from Armenian family who defended her Christian faith and was a martyr. Yeah, and it's just to say that people with Armenian heritage and background lived on this territory, have lived on this territory for many, many generations. And in Georgia, in to the time of dissolution of the Soviet Union, have lived 500,000 of Armenians, or people who wrote in their passport Armenian, or in whose passports there was written a nationality Armenian. But after the independence of Georgia, many people, not only
Astamur, I think we may have lost you. You appear to be frozen. We'll just give Astamur a second.
Okay, so this is to show you their people who are identified by themselves or by others live in Georgia. You can see, I have marked them like with yellow to make it easier to understand. And this map is also not 100% exact. It's just to give you some image of this. Armenians live in Georgia in rural areas, which are in the south of Georgia, these small circles, and they live also in towns. And those who live in rural areas, in villages, they don't have that everyday contact with Georgians and with Georgian culture, dominant culture, and lots of them don't know even the language, even Georgian language. Whereas those who live in Batumi or especially in capital of Georgia, in Tbilisi, they have such ability of socialization with Georgians, and they are actually the main research interest for me. That's why I have also two samples. Those ones who live in such heterogeneous setting and have socialized in Georgian setting are my main sample, and just a small control sample are those who do not initially come from this heterogeneous but Armenian homogeneous setting. My research was quite small. I just had 4 respondents from one on the first side, on Hex side, and 4 of them on the from the HOAS. So it's like that. Okay, now I will move to the next part. I will describe the nationalist or national setting of Georgia. Maybe we can read together this quote. It is from the book of Benedict Anderson, Imagined Communities. In London's imperial maps, British colonies were usually pink-red, French were purple-blue, Dutch yellow-brown, and so on. Dyed this way, each colony appeared like a detachable piece of a jigsaw puzzle. As this jigsaw effect became normal, each piece could be wholly detached from its geographic context. In its final form, all explanatory glosses could be summarily removed. Lines of longitude and latitude, place names, sign for rivers, seas, and mountains, neighbors, pure sign, no longer compass to the world. With this quotation, on which I based also some theoretical part of my master thesis, or which was like something which pushed me forward. I want to illustrate Georgia as it is imagined among Georgians by Georgians. You can see the map of Georgia here, and I will show you some more. Like this logotype, or this the territory of Georgia like became a like a icon of itself. jewelry, on as you can see here, like enterprise in Georgia, film in Georgia, like governments advertises to make business in Georgia, yeah, using this icon or using this logo. Or you can also see them on clothes or on street bars. I think they're called like that, yeah, with names, yeah. But I just wanted to share with you this something similar from Australia as well. Even Georgia is as big as Tasmania only. But I just wanted to say that it is my understanding of Australia. Maybe I'm wrong there, and you as Australians may correct me. Everybody except for indigenous Australians, according to my assumption, in Australia, know that his or her ancestors have come to the continent from different places, only several centuries ago. And in my understanding of Georgia, it is not like that. It is, to make an exaggeration, it's like people, it's not, I'm saying it's once again, it's not like that. It's a bit exaggerated, of course, but to show this picture that people underwent a little bit another way of evolution, or took another path of evolution, like not from Africa, but just like, if people were like, if Georgians were created somehow independently from other circumstances in Georgia, in Georgian mountains, whatever. Yeah. So, and Georgians have a kind of biological connection to the soil. Yeah, they feel like that. And accordingly to that, others whose ancestors have lived on the same territory for generations, but do not meet the criteria of Georgianness, were and often still are today considered as guests. Yeah, they are like, okay, your ancestors may have lived here for 2 centuries, but still you are not really Georgian. You do not, and that's why you are not. You don't really 100% belong here. Yeah. And such people accordingly are deprived factually of the right to regard Georgia as their homeland. I think that I have to accelerate a little bit my presentation. Now, shortly, maybe we can come, what does Georgianness mean? Or what different people may understand under this term in Georgia. One of the main factors is belief in the common descent, or the Georgian gene. It is a very primordialist approach and understanding of nationalism. The shared homeland, speaking of the Georgian language, being or having the Orthodox Christian faith, the sense of specialness that we are Georgians and there is no one similar to that identity in the world anymore. And what I would add to this list is Georgian sounding first and especially last names. Yes, this is something which allows you into the group. But it's not so easy. It's not like having all this, you have all these factors and you are like automatically Georgian. It's of course not easy like that. And I will name an example. I will name an example which may illustrate once again the setting. I'm talking about. On the left, you see Robert Sturua. He was a leading theater director in Georgia. And to the right, you see the former president of Georgia, Mikhail Saakashvili. Sorry. In 2011, the director accused Mikhail Saakashvili of being Armenian, and he told President Mikhail Saakashvili cannot love Georgia because he is of hidden Armenian extraction. Yeah, and years later, in 2019, after 8 years, President Saakashvili wrote on his Facebook page that he made a DNA test, and he posted some results on his page, and he was quoting a winged verse from a poem of a Georgian poet Galaktion Abidze, and he wrote, "Not a single drop of the non-Georgian blood have I," and the next sentence was, "By almost 90% I was proved to be Georgian and 1% of Greek origin, and it turned out that my forefathers have not mixed with others but Georgians for centuries." Yeah, this may illustrate the discourse happening in Georgia and how important it is to be too Georgian. Yeah. And you can also follow maybe that this term of Georgian is filled with biological, as I told before, primordialist understanding of nationalism. So, and this is the setting which have to face Georgians who do not fulfill the requirements of Georgianism. Now back to the picture, which was advertising my research on the website of the university, Australian University. We will talk about I will talk about exclusionist practices. I will say that there are, or I see two different exclusionist practices, direct one and indirect one. Direct one is at the example of this ugly duckling on the picture. Direct exclusionist practices are when this duck is in person told that he is ugly and he doesn't belong here, or he's so beautiful and but he still somehow is different from others. Yeah, it may be positive or negative exclusion. And indirect exclusionist practices I call something like when no one is saying to you anything, but you feel somehow that when you are when people or when ducks are talking, that okay, being black in that age is quite extraordinary and it's not okay. Yeah, this is the difference for me. That's how I'm defining these two terms. Okay, and now we're coming to exclusionist practices, which people of Armenian heritage are experiencing in Georgia. First of all, we have to say maybe that there are family names, Armenian family names, which are ending on Dian. And this is something what makes these family names very easy to be identified as no Georgians. Many Georgians have heard of such family names, but and they are in the scope of knowledge in Georgia, but it doesn't mean that they don't remain alien. Many of my respondents, regardless of where and with whom did they socialize, acknowledge that their surnames make them carriers of Armenianness, which they often perceive as a kind of burden to the way to the Georgianness. And in regard to the family names, one of my respondents told that one cannot become Georgian by nationality because I think the surname and the origins hinder me. So I will also talk of a small example of one of my respondents, which is called Goga. He was a sales advisor in a shop, and back then a minister, a Georgian minister, came into this shop, and this guy was having a badge on which was written his very Georgian sounding first name, Goga, and Armenian name with this Yan ending, but having E on the end. And this is very similar to family names from one northern region of Georgia, and some may confuse them. And this minister thought that, okay, well, where are you from Svaneti? Where does your family name with this ending come from? Because because that guy, the minister, was also from the region, but my interviewee or my respondent was saying that he said that, okay, I'm not Swan, I'm not Georgian, but I'm Armenian. Next day, this minister came back to the shop with an Armenian friend of him, and he recognized my respondent and told him, do you see what kind of friendship do we Armenians and Georgians have? And like they talked about their own friendships. And in this situation, or in this example, we can see that Goga was rejected from being a Georgian twice. In the first line, when he was like somehow indirectly forced to admit that he is not Swan and he is Armenian. And for the second time, when the minister spoke of friendship between Armenians and Georgians, and thus underlying somehow indirectly again that these are two different groups. I'm speaking of Georgians and Armenians, so they are still, maybe they're friends, they're close to each other, but they're still two different groups and clubs as well, maybe. And Goga does not belong to the same group as minister belongs. So he belongs to Armenians, yeah. The next direct exclusion is practice I consider as accentuating or underlying non-Orthodox variety of the Georgian, of the Armenian Georgian, when Armenians speak Georgian with a little bit different accent or pronunciation or a different language melody. And when Georgians hearing this, they may identify these people as different. Yeah? Sometimes people also attach negative things to being to Armenianness in Georgia. Many of my respondents lived through such things. For example, once again, Goga was once or several times called Somecho, you Armenian, or don't behave as Armenian. And it meant don't behave stingy, or don't deceive me, or something like that. Yeah, and Goga could not understand why people are saying things like that. You just don't have to underline this ethnicity or nationality. You just can express these things with other words. So. And such reminding practices keep the issue of otherness afloat, contributing to the perception of people like my respondents that ascription to the initial group is inevitable, and one is like, it sounds very dramatic, I think, but one is fated to be a member of the dominant others against his or will forever. Sometimes people are also positively distinguished from the negatively perceived others or negatively perceived group of Armenians. For example, girls from my respondent girls were told that, oh, you're so beautiful, you don't look like Armenian actually, or oh, such a beauty, are you really Armenian? And things like that, yeah. Or saying some bad things about Armenians, but at the same time saying that, okay, don't take it personally, please, because you know that you are our brother, and we don't consider you in that group of Armenians. Like you are our brother. Maybe you are not Georgian, but you are good Armenian or something like that. Yeah. There was also a very interesting case of one of my respondents who was participating in the Russian-Georgian War in 2008. He was a reservist, and there were like after several days, there were like there was a meeting, let's say like that, and 4 or 5 buses came to bring the servicemen, the military men, soldiers, to a place. But from these many buses came very few people out, and one of few was this guy with Armenian sounding first and last name, because his first name was not like Armenian sounding, and sorry, and yes, and he was like the lieutenant who was staying there. He was wondering, and he named his family name and said, "Oh, are you also here?" And he was shocked because many Georgians left, and they were not keen on participating in the war again or further. And this guy came to the meeting, and the first thing he told to other Georgians which were there was that if you see other Georgians, your fellow Georgians, who had decided not to appear today, who decided to flee from the battlefield, to say, remind to those who are hiding under a warm blanket that war is here, and Armenian is fighting for your motherland, yes, for your homeland. Do you remember when I mentioned several minutes ago, or like many minutes ago already, that people are rejected to see Georgia as home of homes, yeah, like a home, like a place where one's family lives or is, and home of home is like a place where many families are, and you in your family feel yourself as a big family in the country, yeah. Okay, and very short about indirect exclusionist practices. For example, when today it is very in Facebook, for example, people with Armenian background see that they're reading different things about Armenians, bad things like I will cite, or I will quote Gayane, for example. People write awful things like, "I wish that all of Armenians, children and adults would die or go to your historic homeland," etc., etc. So it's they did not were accused of being Armenians in person, but they live in this setting of Georgian nationalism, and they feel on themselves is all these indirect exclusionist practices. Sorry. And to the very last part of my, we will come to the very last part of my presentation. I will be very, very briefly. And the rest you can maybe ask in your questions if you have such. I will talk about what people with such problems, let's say, identify themselves with. What strategies do they apply? Those people, so shortly in the first line about the main sample. or respondents from the main sample, which were socialized in a heterogeneous setting where Georgians dominated and the Georgian culture dominated. I can say that according to my feeling, according to my understanding after this research, some of my respondents from this sample, they just actually see themselves as Georgians, because they feel this attachment to the culture, to the language, to this nation, but they do not dare to say that they are Georgians. It is a very interesting, funny fact I have come across, that such people, when they are abroad or when they are speaking to foreigners and they say that, they may say, I'm Georgian. This literally saying this word Georgian, yeah, because in Georgian it sounds differently. It sounds Kartveli. Yeah? It's totally different. But in Georgia, with Georgians, they don't allow themselves to identify themselves as Georgians and say that, okay, I'm Kartveli. They may say it's really like, to make it easier to understand, like, since I'm in Germany right now, it's like German and Deutsch. Yes, the Deutsch, it is how Germans describe themselves in their own language, and German is how people, when they speak in English, refer to Germans. This is that similarity. And there was one very interesting response, which may sum up or it's better to say, when I was forced to understand that I'm Armenian. And my answer is the same. When I was 10 times told you are Armenian, then it was difficult not to believe. When 10 people say that you are Armenian, that means you are one. And to the second sample, these people who grew up in the non-Georgian setting, they also don't really associate themselves as Georgians, or they don't really feel that kind on the same level the Georgian is as my respondents from the first sample feel and think. But they still experience that negative attitudes towards Armenians in Georgia. And that's why they prefer that the topic of nationality doesn't play a big role at all in the society. They prefer that it's not so important, it doesn't matter. Yeah. And some of them applied strategies like one of girls whose quote is here. She has worked in Tbilisi, in the capital of Georgia, and in an office where different people were coming to, translatory office was it, and like, and she said that she heard that two Georgians were talking to each other about Armenians, and she understood that it could go to the wrong direction or to the negative direction, this discussion, and she just came to them and said, "Hello, I'm Armenian," just to avoid in the future different words which she may could hear. Yeah, so it was like she was also like indirectly forced to identify herself as Armenian in order to avoid in the future negative emotional side effects. So I have started with side effects about COVID and now ending with the side effects about follow the process of self-identification. Thank you. I know that I was a little bit longer than it was planned, but that was how it was. And I would be happy if you would have some questions. I would gladly answer or try to answer your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Astamur. That was absolutely a fascinating presentation, really interesting to hear the different stories of the people you interviewed. I already actually have one question, and this is from Marcus, and he asked, do Georgian passports still include ethnicity like Tsarist and Soviet ones used to? And his second question is, can Armenian be taught in government schools?
I will ask, to the first question, thank you that there was a question at all. Yes, no, there are not there is not this graph of nationality in Georgian passes anymore since early 2000s, I think, if I'm not mistaken, which many Georgians don't feel good about, actually. And the second question was about schooling system. If people with Armenian names want to be in to learn in Georgian schools, they have the possibility to do that. So there, if I got right the question, yeah.
It actually can you learn the Armenian language in Georgian state schools?
Okay. Yeah, okay. There are Armenian schools in Georgia. Several of them are in the capital, and in the south regions, which I mentioned earlier, where the rural Armenians live, there are predominantly Armenian schools. So the language of teaching is also Armenian, the main language of teaching. They learn also some Georgian, but it's like it's a mandatory to learn Georgian in those schools, but the level of teaching is not so high. And in Georgian schools, where Georgian pupils go, or not only Georgian, but like Georgian schools, as long as I know, there is not an option to learn an Armenian language. So there are options to learn West European languages, but not Armenian one. Did I get the question correct? Did I answer correct?
Okay. Perfect. Pravana.
Fantastic. Do we have any other questions? Kirill.
Yeah, thanks, Astamur. It was truly fascinating. But just to continue on Marcus's question, what's the situation like in Javakheti? So what is the primary identity among the ethnic Armenians living there? Are they, well, basically the primary locus of identity is civic Georgianness or ethnic Armenianness? Because we don't hear much from that part of the world at all. And the second question, it can be quite frivolous, but I really would like to know. Hypothetically, a Georgian Armenian meets Georgian Azeri somewhere in Gardabani, for example. In their interlocution and the mutual conversation, which side of their identity would prevail? Would it be Georgian civicness, or the blood would boil and the ethnic and Azeri sides would clash in some kind of visceral interaction? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Kirill. Difficult question, especially the second one. I think what I can answer to those questions, both questions, is it depends on, first of all, it depends on the generation. It's a question of generation, and it also depends on the milieu in which these people communicate or have socialized. I have worked in 2016 as a coordinator of a project which was connected with minorities, ethnic and religious minorities in different regions of Georgia. And according to this impression, but also to the research which I conducted, the main identification, so mainly people from Javakheti, the south region of Georgia, where Armenians compactly live, associate themselves with as Armenians, and they are proud of being Armenian. And among my respondents from the second control sample, those who live in that region or those who are from that region, they also they studied in Tbilisi, so in the capital of Georgia, and they have been in the connection with Georgians and Georgian culture after their 18th year, yeah, so quite late, but for a long time, like for 5-6 years, and this played a huge role in their self-identification. So it affected their self-identification, and they, in civic terms, feel themselves as Georgians to some degree, but mainly they, of course, see themselves as Armenians. And about Georgian and Armenian and Azerbaijani persons meeting somewhere in Kardaban. Kardaban is a very small place in the south of Georgia, populated with minorities, with Azerbaijani minorities predominantly, I think. I don't know. It's like it's the same. I think that they would not fight. They would not fight. Maybe they would have some like wording quarrel between each other, and due to the situation in Karabakh, they would maybe exchange and have their present their nationalist agenda to each other and their view of circumstances in Karabakh. But thanks God, it's in that regard in Georgia, they understand each other. Maybe this not civic Georgianness, but citizenship. Yeah, as I told, it's different thing, like feeling of citizenship, feeling of belongingness to Georgia as a citizen plays there an important role. That's how I see it, at least.
Actually, on Kirill's question, it reminded me of quite an interesting story that was published in EurasiaNet back during the 2020 war between Azerbaijan and Armenia. And it was actually about, these interviews of Georgian Armenians and Georgian Azeris in this particular village, and how actually, yes, the civic Georgian identity did trump the ethnic affiliation. This is quite an interesting story about how they these Georgian Armenians and Georgian Azeris were actually like working together in the same companies and businesses. So yeah, that I thought was an interesting response during the war.
Okay, I will just maybe say something later to this.
So do we have any other questions? We are a bit over the end time, but if Astamur, if you're happy to stay a minute or two longer, I think we can take another question.
I just had one more, if you don't mind, Dana. Astamur, thank you. It was fascinating. What is the extent of intermarriage, insofar as it can be sort of worked out between, say, ethnic Armenians and ethnic, well, I suppose, Georgians? And is the Armenian community growing or shrinking in Georgia? And lastly, sorry, these are three little questions. Why is the Armenian community socioeconomically better off than the average Georgian or not? Is it still got the reputation of being, you know, kind of economic sort of, you know, trading community and these sorts of things? Sorry, you can just deal with one of those if you want.
Very interesting questions, Marcus. Thank you. First, about the intermarriage. Among my respondents, I cannot name you, unfortunately, the statistical numbers. According to my impression, the last years with my generation, I'm 30 years old. It's more often, I have the impression. Among my respondents, from 9 people, only one had a Georgian mother, but the father did not speak Georgian, and they communicated in Russian. And I have asked my respondents, and from the second sample, from Javakheti region, from the south, they have really no familiar connections in most cases with Georgians, but among the respondents from the first sample, they have such connect. So they know people from their community which intermarried or have Georgian husbands or Georgian wives. But I think that this tendency is like, I know personally several people who have mixed families, Georgian Armenian families. About social economic status of Armenians in modern Georgia. You underlined in your question already, Marcos, that they were Armenians traditionally were trading and including in Georgia as well. And once Armenians made majority of today's capital of Georgia, Tbilisi, in the end of the 19th century, and Armenians were in majority in the city council, which was deciding for the city, and until 1917. All except one mayors of the city were Armenian, elected mayors. Yeah, but with the Soviet Union, so in the Soviet Georgia, so after Soviet policy of economic policy, when people lost their money and their how it's called
Private trading and so on.
Yes, so yeah. Economic independence, let's say like that. Georgians have Georgians, according to the nationalist policy of the Soviet Union, in each republic, each like leading nation should lead, and in the case of Georgia, it was the nation of Georgia or Georgians, and according to this, so political leadership of Georgians transformed also in economic economic firstness. I don't know if I can say something like that in English, but I think you understand it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and nowadays, so it's in one academic article I read very interesting thing that Armenians, which in the 19th century were like bourgeois, tradesmen, they just they lived in the central districts, and during the Soviet time, and now after independence of Georgia, they moved to the outskirts of the city. Yeah, so it's maybe it also it can show also the tendencies. And one of the questions was about Armenian community numbers. According to the last Soviet census, in Georgia lived like 500,000 of Armenians, and now the number is 160,000.
So a big drop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, quite. Like 60 or 70,000 living in Tbilisi, like 80,000, I think, living in the south of Georgia, or 100,000 in the rural area, and the rest living in other small towns or places.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your interesting questions.
You have one more question. Do you have time to answer it?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So it's the one Kirill's written in the chat. I don't know if you want to actually ask it verbally, Kirill.
Yeah, so I just wonder, it's a general question, how is Zviad Gamsakhudia remembered these days? Is he forgotten, or his interesting ethno-nationalist ideas still have some traction with the officials in Tbilisi?
It's a difficult question. Once again, he is remembered in Georgia. Gamsakhudia is remembered in Georgia. He's viewed as and regarded as the first president of Georgia who declared independence of Georgia. But about his nationalist, so it is this is, I think, for everybody. It's true for everybody, yeah, or for the biggest part of the population, that okay, he was the first president, etc., etc. It's important, but his ideas about Georgian nationalism, if they're celebrated, it's a good question. I think they're shared. It's the same ideas are shared. It's not to say that they are shared because of Gamsakhudia, but those ideas are there. And on the official level, I have the impression that there's the tendency to accentuate on the role of Gamsakhudia as a person who declared independence of Georgia in 1991, but not as and people, officials prefer not to mention the nationalist rhetoric of Gamsakhudia at all. Just like leave it alone, and no one asks, I will not answer, something like that. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Astamur, for that fascinating presentation and for answering all the questions. So I think we'll wrap it up now, since we've already gone 15 minutes over time, but thank you again. And perhaps we'll see you in the future Majlis.
Thank you for this nice atmosphere, and thank you very much for your questions and for your attention. And thank you, Katinka, that you build a bridge, or the bridge between Dana and me. It was a great opportunity for me. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Astamur, and thanks, Katya, also for connecting us. That's great. All right, and thank you everyone for attending. The next few months, we don't have anyone decided yet for the Majlis, but in September, I can confirm that Dr. Inas Iktat, I think I'm pronouncing his name correctly, hopefully, he will be presenting on cryptocurrencies in the Middle East, but Khalid is the one who arranged that one, so he will be moderating that. So I look forward to seeing some of you there. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Great.
So I have to go, unfortunately, but I just want to ask several questions very quickly, maybe. First of all, thank you again, really. It was very nice. And I know that in the first minutes, there was a little bit loudly. And if it was